Welcome to this Master Review Explainer. Look, if you're gearing up for Quiz 1 in Foundations of Information Systems and Media Technology, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're going to completely deconstruct the core frameworks you need to master. We'll be going from the huge, macro theories of how technology shapes society all the way down to the specific systems running your favorite apps right now. Let's dive in. Okay, let's do a quick run-through of our roadmap today. 1. Tech, Society, and Diffusion. 2. Systems Thinking and DIKW. 3. Information Systems Types. 4. Planning and the SDLC. 5. Ethics and Information Security. And finally, 6. The Malaysian Digital Landscape. Starting off with Section 1, Tech, Society, and Diffusion, the macro forces. All right, let's kick things off with a massive, epic battle of ideas. On one side, we've got technological determinism. Theorists like Marshall McLuhan basically argue that technology is this autonomous force, like a giant, unstoppable machine that inevitably pushes human society forward. But then, on the flip side, we have the social shaping of technology, or SST for short, championed by folks like Donald Mackenzie and Judy Wajman. They argue that actually, we drive the machine. Their whole thing is that technology is fundamentally shaped by our existing social conditions, our politics, and our economics. So how does a completely new piece of tech actually spread through a culture? Everett Rogers mapped this out brilliantly with his diffusion of innovations theory, breaking it down into 5 distinct stages. Stage 1 is knowledge. You just realize the tech exists. Stage 2 is persuasion. You start forming an attitude about it, which is usually heavily influenced by your peers. Stage 3 is that critical decision moment. Do you adopt it or reject it? Stage 4 is implementation. You actually hit download and start using the thing. And finally, stage 5 is confirmation, where you decide if it was actually worth the hype or if you're hitting delete. Now, to really round out our macro theories, you need to lock in a few key historical figures. Frank Webster offered a pretty powerful critique of the information society, basically warning us that having more data doesn't magically create an enlightened era. Manuel Castells gave us the whole concept of the network society. Then you've got Alvin Toffler, who predicted the electronic cottage, literally anticipating our modern work-from-home era decades before it happened. But definitely pays special attention to Brian Winston. His law of the suppression of radical potential is so fascinating. He argues that powerful existing institutions will actually suppress disruptive technologies on purpose just to protect their own legacy business models. Moving on to Section 2, Systems Thinking and DIKW, Making Sense of the Chaos. You know, systems thinking has evolved a ton over the years. We didn't always view organizations as these giant, interconnected machines. Ludwig von Bertalanffy kicked things off with general systems theory, which just looked at basic inputs, processes, and outputs. Then Norbert Wiener came along and added cybernetics to the mix. He introduced feedback loops, meaning a system could actually self-correct based on new data. Finally, Peter Cheklin realized something absolutely crucial. Human beings are messy. So he introduced soft systems methodology to account for our complex, unpredictable human behavior and all the conflicting cultures that exist within any real organization. And that brings us perfectly to the DIKW hierarchy. Think of it as a pyramid. At the very base, you have raw data, which honestly is totally useless on its own. It only becomes valuable when you organize it into information. Then, when you apply human experience to that information, it transforms into knowledge. Finally, you apply human judgment and ethics, and it peaks at wisdom. But here is the real kicker. Notice the processing gap here. While machines and software can completely automate the journey from data up to knowledge, true wisdom, that remains a strictly human-centric domain. It requires our values and our lived experience. Section 3, Information Systems Types, the Organizational Pyramid. Let's dive into the IS taxonomy. Imagine a massive organizational pyramid. It's built this way because different information systems serve completely different management levels. Down at the wide base, you've got your day-to-day operational staff. Right in the middle are the managerial levels, focusing heavily on control and tactical decisions. And way up at the very tip, you have the strategic executives, whose whole job is looking at the long-term future of the company. So let's put some real-world names to these layers, shall we? At the operational level, you have transaction processing systems, or TPS. These handle high-volume routines. Think of a Maybank terminal swiping thousands of debit cards every hour. Moving up to the managers, Management Information Systems, or MIS, provide structured reports, while Decision Support Systems, DSS, use really complex analytical models. Imagine AirAsia dynamically adjusting their flight prices in real time. At the strategic top, Executive Information Systems, EIS, drive those long-term dashboards for CEOs, like over at Media Prima. And kind of wrapping around all of this, spanning every level, are knowledge management systems, or KMSs. These allow corporate giants like Petronas to seamlessly share global engineering expertise internally. All right, Section 4, Planning and the SDLC, Building the Systems. If you're going to build a complex system and, actually want it to survive without completely collapsing, you need a blueprint. Enter the Systems Development Lifecycle, or SDLC. Phase 1 is planning, asking, is this project even feasible? Phase 2 is analysis. What do the end users actually need this thing to do? Phase 3 is design, mapping out the literal technical architecture. Phase 4 is implementation, building, testing, and finally deploying it. And Phase 5 is maintenance, squashing bugs, and making sure the system stays alive long-term. Now, that traditional SDLC is often called the waterfall model, simply because it flows strictly downward, phase by phase. But hey, tech moves fast, right? Waterfall can sometimes be a bit dangerously rigid. So enter the modern alternatives. Agile breaks development into fast, iterative sprints so teams can adapt on the fly. Rapid application development, or RAD, relies heavily on quick prototyping and getting immediate user feedback. And then there's the spiral model, which is highly risk-driven, meaning it rigorously checks for vulnerabilities at every single turn. Section 5, Ethics and Information Security, the Guardrails. Whenever we evaluate any system security, we have to start at the absolute rock-bottom foundation, the CIA triad. And no, for the record, not the government agency. It stands for confidentiality, keeping your data totally hidden from unauthorized eyes; integrity, ensuring your data hasn't been maliciously altered or tampered with; and availability, making sure the system is actually online and working when you need it. Balance is everything here. If you lock down a system too tightly just to ensure confidentiality, you might completely ruin its availability for the people who actually need to use it. Because, let's face it, real-world threats are actively trying to break that CIA triad every single day. Malware and ransomware severely threaten availability by locking up your files. Social engineering and phishing directly threaten confidentiality by tricking people into just handing over their passwords. To combat all this, organizations rely on defense in depth, which basically means layering multiple security measures on top of each other, and a zero-trust model. Zero trust means exactly what it sounds like. Never trust a network request by default. Always verify the user and enforce strict multi-factor authentication. And finally, Section 6, the Malaysian Digital Landscape, Theory in Practice. Let's tether all these abstract concepts directly to reality. The PDPA 2010 is the legal bedrock for data ethics right here in Malaysia. The Personal Data Protection Act strictly regulates exactly how personal data can be processed in commercial transactions. It operates on 7 core principles, but the absolute biggest takeaway is that it puts power back into the hands of the user. Organizations must obtain your clear consent, they have to guarantee your data's security, and they must give you access to correct your own information. For the quiz, you absolutely need to confidently link our local institutions to their primary functions. The MCMC is your core regulatory body governing networks and cybersecurity. MSC Malaysia, along with the newer My Digital Blueprint, are the strategic engines driving our national digital economy forward. Over on the media side, RTM is your traditional public broadcaster, while Astro represents the massive expansion of satellite TV, and they're sitting right alongside huge conglomerates like Media Prima, who are heavily using data analytics to drive their audience engagement. And this really brings us to the core thesis of everything we've covered today. On one hand, you have the relentless, fast-paced march of technological innovation, hardware, software systems, and data architectures. But just as the social shaping of technology theory taught us earlier, none of this exists in a vacuum. You cannot truly understand how technology operates in the wild without also understanding the local regulatory bodies, like the MCMC, and the ethical frameworks, like the PDPA, that govern its real-world impact. They are literally two sides of the exact same coin. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a quick, kind of provocative thought for your study sessions. Open up the app you use the absolute most every single day. Now, if you apply Peter Checklin's human-centric soft systems thinking to it, looking way past just the code in the UI, how does that change the way you evaluate its cultural impact on your life? How does that app fit into the DIKW hierarchy we talked about? Once you start seeing the digital world through these frameworks, I promise you, you will never look at your phone the same way again. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer. Good luck on the quiz.